Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As always, I'm very happy to have you here. In the last video, we talked about how to build a Django REST framework from scratch. And we did that using a local SQLite database that was contained within our project folder. Now that is very neat if you do like a prototyping type of development, but as soon as you want to move your application to production, the way these DevOps chains are set up today with using Docker containers to move your application and using Kubernetes to run them, handling the database is kind of a PIA, and you really want to keep your database outside of the DevOps chain. There's basically two main ways to do that. The first one is you install a server, which means you have to do all the administrative and maintenance work yourself. Or a more recent option is that you can actually rent a database from one of the cloud hosting companies. And I have done that and had very good experience with it. I basically set up a Postgres database in one of these cloud hosters within an hour, and I got data from my local PC using Python into the database within an hour. And because they're so easy to maintain, I think that's really a great approach. However, because the installation process of these databases differs from provider to provider, I will not show you the installation of these today. What I will show you instead is how to get data from the database and into the database using Python. And as always, you should have at least some basic Python knowledge in order to follow. Now with that out of the way, let's get started. Now the two main ways to connect to your database are using a REST framework as we built in the last video, or build a direct connection. When to use which is kind of up to you. However, you probably use the REST framework if you want to allow public access to your database, because this is kind of a standardized connection, and it's more secure and it's easier to handle, however less flexible than a direct connection that you build yourself and you basically can decide about the functionality on your own. Now, in order to create the database connection in Django, what you do is you open basically your settings file and then you scroll down to the database section. There's a dictionary here if you scroll down, and as you can see here it says databases, and all you do is you take that entire section and you just replace it with what you see here. Now you have to define all these parameters. You see that I have blacked out username, password, and the host. These are all information that you have to define within the creation process of your database, and you will have them available. So that's already it for the configuration. And if you already have done migrations to your SQLite database, what you should ideally do is remove all the migrations from the migration file. There is a migrations folder that you can see here, and you should basically remove all the migrations. Leave the dunder init file in here, and then in the terminal you just run make migrations and then migrate. So much for the REST framework. Now the red arrow in here represents a more direct way using a Python library. So in order to connect to the Postgres database using just Python, what I do is I have opened a new Sublime window, as you can see here, and I will create a file now that I will call db_connect.py, and I will save that into just my Avengers folder, for example. And let me remove that file name here again. And before I import anything, I will open PowerShell again. And I will cd into my Avengers folder. And I will do a pip env shell. And let me clear that. And what I have to do now is I have to install psycopy-g2, and I do that using pipenv install and then psycop-g2, and let's install it. This will take about 5 minutes. It's quite a long installation, and I will pause the video until it's done. Now this took a while. Let me clear this and go back to Sublime, and I now type psycop G2. And I actually want to import that. And let's see if we can actually import it. So I do an ls, and you can see the db connect file is there. I clear that again, and I type python db underscore and run it, and it doesn't throw any errors. So the next thing we have to do is we have to provide a connection string that allows PsyCopG2 to connect to the database. And that connection string has the host, the port, the database name, and user and password in order to connect. So I will put all these credentials in a separate function, and I will call this function connect. And then I will call the connection con. And as you can see here, it's con psycopg2.connect. So there's the host, for example. And I will not show all of that host address because I don't want everyone to have access to my database. Then there's the port. And then there is the name of the database. You define that when you create the database. In Postgres is also the group. And in this case, it's called default DB. And then I need to provide username and password. And again, I will cover that so you can't actually see both of these information. And eventually, what I will do is I will just return the connection. And let me just remove this bracket here. And then this is already it for the connection. We will use that later to connect to the database. And we also need to have a payload. And in this case, we want to select data from the database. So we provide a filter, and I call that filter SQL filter. And it basically has a select statement, some fields that I want to select. And I need to provide the table which I want to select from. And that table is testing test data in this case. In case I don't want all the lines within these columns, I can use the where statement and then basically reduce the data that is returned to me. In this case, I only want to have records where the first name is Natasha and the last name is Romanova. Now that is already the SQL string. And in order to get data from the Postgres database using that SQL string, I have to now pass that in to get the data back. And I can do this using another function, and I will call this function getData. And that function takes a connection and it takes the SQL filter with con as con. And then it's with con.cursor as cur. And I want to execute that cursor using the SQL filter. And finally, I want the cursor to fetch all the data and return it to me. So I do a fetch all and I assign the result to data and I return data eventually. Data equals that get data and then the connect function, it has no parameters, and I pass in the SQL filter. And eventually I print the result because I want to see what the database returns. And let me go back to my PowerShell here. And then I rerun my dbconnect.py. And let's see what it returns to us. And we can see already that it has returned a record which says Romanova Natasha. It has a number of datetime fields. What I have to do now is I have to enrich these data with the fields that I have provided. And basically what I want to return is a dictionary which has key value pairs in it, where the key is the name of the field and the value is the result. So kind of what the REST API actually returned in the last video. But in this case, I have to do it myself. And there is libraries which you can use in order to facilitate that process. For example, SQL Alchemy will help you. But for this demonstration, I just do it manually. And to do that, I'm returning to the Sublime Text document that I have here. And now I will create a regular expression string that allows me to select the relevant information from that SQL filter. Now, what I do next is I type r equals re.compile, And for today, I will just type this raw string out instead of explaining it. This will be a topic for an entire session. All I have to do next is then pass the string into the search methods of regular expression. So I type re.search and I search for R in SQL filter. And I'm doing two replaces here. That will make it much easier in the upcoming lines to work with the matching result. And because I have used named fields here, I can now treat match like a dictionary. And I can actually say fields equals match, and then I do just the dictionary-like selection of fields. And I do a strip and a split. And in order to see if that worked, what I will do is I print the result here. And I do this using an F string. And if I save that and go back to my terminal here and rerun that, let's see if that worked. No, and you see it didn't, because a non-type object is not subscriptable. Let's see why that happened. So I'm back. I haven't actually figured out what the problem is. On another computer, it runs exactly as it was. What I did was I removed the last group, and if I remove that and save that and then rerun it, then you can see that it actually returns the list of fields here. And we can actually work with these values. Now what we have to do now is we have to combine these keywords here with the data, and I just assume that the order is preserved, and I can now zip together the key fields and the values here. And before I do this, let me also get the table information from the regular expression. And to get the table information, I just type dbTable equals match, and then again dbTable dot strip. And if I print the result here, I'm using an F string again. Let's go over to the shell and run it. We have so many attempts. Then you can see that not just the fields have been selected, but also the table testing test data has been selected by the regular expression. And now I can actually work with it. And let me first type the line before I explain it. I will zip together the two. Basically, I've created the variable out, and I have assigned it to a list comprehension that you see here. Basically, I take the fields, which I have here, and I zip it together with each line from the returned data that you can see here. And then I convert the zipped tuple that is created here to a dictionary. And I do this for every line in data. Because I also want to have the table information in there, I will type for d in out, and I do a d.update, and in update I pass in a dictionary with the key of db_table, and the value will be also db_table, but it will be the variable dbTable that you see up here. So I just go back to my terminal here and I rerun the function. And as you can see here now, we have this out list that contains dictionaries. And in each dictionary, we have last name Romanova, first name Natasha, create date. We also have the transaction date, and we have the change date. Now, in the same way as we have selected the data here, we can actually post the data to Postgres. And in order to do this, let me please correct this doc string here. And I will remove all the lines here and replace it with this string that you can see here. Hang on, not the first line. I remove that one. If you are adding date fields like this to your database, you have to deal with these kind of time zone information, especially if you use both the REST framework and the direct database connection. So let me remove the lower part here for the moment, because we don't need that for posting purposes. And then I will just print the result. Let's see what happens. I clear this first, and then I run dbconnect. And as you can see here, I still have some problems with the double quotes here. I remove those, And we also don't want to fetch anything. So what I will just do is I will just return true for the moment. Let's go back and rerun it. And it returns true. We could check the database now, but believe me, it has posted the data to the database. Now that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and see you next time.